Hello, welcome to episode 101. Yes, 101 episodes. I'm kind of shocked that it's gone for this long, but that's good. That means we're making progress. That means that the game is getting done, and that means that people are watching this and getting something out of the episodes where I program a game from scratch tonight, live on stream. Let's get started. The first thing is I am going to launch the pre-order page on itch.io for Cerulean Ascension. There aren't going to be any screenshots or videos or anything because it's still pretty early on. This is basically just for people who want to get access to the source code. And so just to clarify, the source code that you're going to get access to is the 6502 assembly for the game in the GitHub that I've set up. And, I'll go based on the email that you provide when you pay on itch.io. If there's some sort of other account you'd like me to use, you know how to reach me on Twitter, or you can email me at zelius@gmail.com, and I can switch that. But let's get that posted. I did a little write-up, thanks to Rich, who's on stream tonight watching, and also Jordan, our artist, for helping me with the copy related to the description of the game and the story, and making sure it's not too spoilery, but also in line with the vision we have for this game. So here we go. I'm going to post it, and I'm going to post the page on the chat here. So there it is, cellosphere.itch.io/cerulean. And here, let's post that on Twitter too. You get access to the assembly code as well as a ROM when the game is complete. Obviously the game is, going to take some time to release still. And those of you who have been watching, you will know what pace these things happen. Yeah, so cerulean does refer to water and sky, and there the question is from MDTA UK about the choice of the word cerulean. So yes, that, but also there is some backstory that is related to some game design work that we had done many years ago on another shooter called Cerulean Dreams, which never really got anywhere. There might be bits and pieces of it that you can find out there on the internet, which I would disregard. But basically, the storyline is key, and we never really disclosed that much of the storyline. Yes, thousands of years ago, many years ago, almost 20 years ago, man, that's crazy to say that out loud. Yeah, and so this is in direct line of that game story wise. But anyway, so. I don't want to get too much into the story, because spoilers. We don't want to ruin it for people. Like I said in one of the previous episode, An independently published ebook from 2011. Okay, well, so anyway, though, I was not aware of the ebook. I'm aware of someone making fun of the horrible Game Boy Advance demo that we put together with absolutely no actual artists. But that's a story for another day. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so I said in the previous episode, in episode 100, there is I will try to indicate which episodes are kind of spoiler-ish if you want to not know what happens in the story and wait till the game is done. Then you can opt out of those episodes, but for now, I'll try to kind of keep it hush hush a little bit because I think it's good, it's interesting, and obviously on the NES there's only so many things you can do story wise within the limitations of the system, but Jordan has some really great ideas for the art and what he's gonna put together, and I'm excited to see that. He's working on a new title screen, which we will incorporate and also get up onto the itch.io page so that people will be able to get a sense of what the game actually is. For those people not watching this stream, I did mention that it's been something under development and streamed on Twitch, and also the videos posted on YouTube. So I do think people will go back and look, as they find the page, and yeah, so it's there. Obviously, you're not obligated to purchase that or pre-order that, but if you're interested in getting access to the code, that's one way to do it. If you're good with waiting until after the game is released to look at it, then I will make the code public once the game is out. So really the code access is this is just for the early access to the code. So up to you. If you do, I appreciate it, but this is been trying to be transparent about everything here with the what we're doing and how that all works. So do you plan to have cutscenes, and do you plan to have level intros like ship entering the frame and then some indication level has started and the player is... Yeah, so definitely as far as how much in the way of cutscenes we actually get to have, it will depend on how much space we actually have and what mapper we use. Different mappers will give us more storage. We might end up going to a mapper that uses char RAM so that we can dynamically load the tiles in and give us some more flexibility for things like cutscenes, and just have a lot of prog ROM. And switching banks to have more storage available, since the the cartridges for that kind of thing are relatively cheap compared to something like MMC3. And this is, I'm going based on, if you go to Infinite NES Lives, that's where I've been kind of getting all my pricing from, roughly. Paul's a good dude. Met him in person at MagFest, and he is one of the main suppliers of new NES boards rather than using donor boards. And so you can see there are a bunch of options here in terms of the cost per board and space available and order quantities. There's also GT-ROM, which is that was created by Memblers, who, if you've looked at the NES dev community, has been doing this for a really, really long time. He's been on a few of the streams, actually, which was cool that he joined in. But he developed the GT-ROM board, which has a lot of really interesting features. It has four screen mirroring and trying to think what else it has built into it. I mean, the whole point of GT-ROM is that it's supposed to be an inexpensive board to use. It doesn't have features like the scanline IRQ for precise timing of the of where you are drawing on the screen, but we may not need that based on the fact that we kind of swapped out the use of the HUD. Right, we're not doing that anymore, so we probably don't need to use MMC3. But we'll see. I mean, I'm just kind of working through all the features that we think we need to do to get the game running well, and then we'll kind of switch mappers depending on I think mostly on our storage requirements in terms of level data and graphical data. Prog-ROM for each level. That was a question with a 0 page of sorts for prog code that must persist between levels for clear delineation. Yeah, I mean, that's how that would work, right? You usually have a fixed bank of your prog-ROM code that has your shared functionality. Otherwise, you have to deal with, if you're jumping back and forth between prog-ROM banks, you have to make sure that things that you reference are either available in the same location on the prog-ROM, like at the same memory address, or you have some way of looking up where it actually is, depending on the prog-ROM bank that you have loaded. So we'll see. I was thinking more so for the use of the graphical data rather than having it be fixed in char-ROM that's bankable. I don't know. We'll see. The scanline IRQ H blank is the best feature in my opinion, as it gives you reliable timing, but an extra name table ready for direct RAM transfer could be helpful too. The window feature on the Game Boy is very useful. Yeah, I think the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance both had that. I'm thinking of the same feature you're talking about, and I've said this before, but the Game Boy Advance is actually a really awesome system to program for. It's like all the great features that the Super Nintendo had, but it's modern enough and powerful enough that you can program it in C for the most part without too much performance lost. And then you can always switch to assembly for optimization. You can do that with the NES too, but it's a lot harder because you have to be way more selective about your C programming on the NES. Especially for anything related to code that has to be performant. The C code generated assembly is generally not very good. GBA has inferior sound hardware, sadly. Yeah, I mean it was a portable system. It wasn't really meant to match 100%. Yeah, that Sony sound chip was good. It's one of those things where it's funny. I feel like a lot of people kind of, or I shouldn't say a lot of people. There are a number of people that I've talked to who feel like the SBC chip on the Super NES is sort of generic sounding. Excuse me. But I always thought it sounded particularly good. It definitely sounds like it's sample based, but I thought, I don't know, maybe that's just kind of what I was used to, because the Genesis has a Yamaha audio chip built into it, which very clearly and distinctly sounds like a Yamaha audio synthesizer. The sounds that it has built into it, the pianos and different sounds, the drums and the sound effect sounds and the strings, they all sound like synths from the day. And I don't know, I always felt like while it's certainly very distinct and recognizable, excuse me, it just makes me think of old sort of DOS ad-lib Sound Blaster games with sort of less I don't know, and this is all, sort of my opinion coming at it from a person who is really into video game music and and composing. I Man, sorry, I'm just still having that throat clearing issue. So, I always thought it sounded sort of like older DOS games, which I mean, some of them had great soundtracks. There's nothing wrong with it, but the Super NES, really, I thought the sound capabilities were really good, and yeah, they probably had a sound kit that they gave to developers to share, samples, but you didn't have to, right? You didn't have to use the samples that were included in that, and MDTA UK is referencing the Donkey Kong Country soundtracks, which are phenomenal. So those are good examples of where the SPC really made a huge difference compared to what you could have done on the Genesis. Not to say the Genesis doesn't have good music. There's a lot of good music on it, but it's really distinct sound. That was one thing that I was kind of interested in, knowing how on the Mega SG they were going to recreate that sound accurately, but I believe they actually, I can double check this, but I'm pretty sure there is a Yamaha chip actually in, yeah, so the Mega SG actually includes the Yamaha sound chip on it. Which one is it? The YM2612, which is why it actually sounds correct, because just trying to emulate that, even with Kevtris doing the development, it's not the same as actually having the real thing. So anyway, here, I'm going to mute myself for a second so I can cough. Okay, much better. Sorry about that. All right, so we launched the pre-order page. We talked a little bit about some fun things related to retro gaming, which I really do enjoy. If you haven't used either the Mega SG or the Super NT, I totally recommend them. Excuse me, because they are pretty amazing, and I know they're pricey compared to like the Retron and stuff like that, or just using a Raspberry Pi, but man, they feel like playing on the real thing, but you're playing on your HD TV, and it just feels so much more responsive and fluid. It's such a much nicer experience, and although this Super NT is limited with the jailbreak in terms of what it can do, what games it can play, if it has a specialized chip like Super FX on it, the Mega SG, from what I can tell, is able to play everything pretty much. They just released the jailbreak for it on the 1st. Smoke Monster posted that. And he went through all the features, and one of them is playing the ROMs off the SD card, and pretty cool, and it's neat to play those games. I didn't have a Genesis growing up. I played that at my cousin's house, and definitely the nostalgia there is different than the Super Nintendo, because I never really beat any of the Genesis games. Super Nintendo, I beat most of the games I had, but the Genesis, it was mostly something that I played with him, so pretty cool to be able to kind of revisit some of those games. Yeah, I mean, again, the Super NT, Mega SG, all of those systems are pretty pricey, and the shipping costs don't help. They're kind of crazy. Even to New York in the States, it's like $20 shipping, which is expensive, but it is what it is. So if you can get it. It's pretty cool. If you can't, I mean, there are other ways, and they're all there are many really good ways. So let's get into some code here before I talk the whole night away about gaming nostalgia. One of the things I wanted to fix, we had worked on changing up the format here for. Why is my wife messaging me? So we switched over to this JSON format for the levels so that we can start building the different transitions for the levels. So we can transition from a map to a repeating sequence and then to another map, and that will hopefully allow us to do some sort of piecing together of elements to provide us with a more interesting map layout. I mean, we have to conserve our space because we can't have these huge we can't have these huge maps like we might on other systems just because of the limited cartridge space. All right, sorry about that. Implement the looping segments. Does that require attribute table to be updated as it scrolls, or does that loop like the metal tiles? So it shouldn't. Let me think about that. The way I'd probably implement the looping section is that we would just do a broad update to the name tables and to the name tables and to the attributes, so that we don't have to be checking what the attributes look like. I mean, they do have to be updated at least the first time around because they have to match whatever meta tiles we're putting on there. Initially I was thinking that the looping sections would just be one meta tile, and we wouldn't allow for more than that. Maybe we will. I don't know. I really hate working on the attributes. It's one of those things where I think anybody who works on NES development agrees that the attributes just suck. I mean, you've seen some of the episodes, hopefully, where I just spend hours and hours messing with them. No, so the name tables consist of attributes. Each name table, because it's 960 bytes. I'm pretty sure about this. There's 960 bytes for the tiles, and then the remaining bytes in the 1K are attribute bytes. So each name table has its own set of attributes. Let's just double check that I'm not lying here, but I believe that's true. Yeah, at the end of each name table. So those 64 bytes have to be updated for each name table as we update the screen. And so, initially I'm thinking we want to do something where we just repeat the same meta tile over and over again. If it's a tree canopy or water or something, and we'll do, the idea would be that, as I was talking about the other day, we'd want to do something where, we have one section where we're looping, right? And we can say, that it's like trees, low altitude, and the speed is, say, 5 pixels per frame, and we'll do that times 10. I don't know. I'm just making these numbers up, but you'll get the point of what I'm saying soon, hopefully. And then you have, trees, medium altitude, That's 3 pixels per frame times 10, and then another sequence of trees, high altitude, at maybe 2 frames per second, 2 pixels per second scrolling times 10, and then finally we'll have some portion of a map that's not looping, and we'll switch over to 1 pixel per frame scrolling, and then it just happens one time, and then so all of that is strung together, and hopefully will provide a convincing illusion of cerulean, your ship, climbing altitude, because it'll speed, the speed will get adjusted, the image will get adjusted, and so it will look like you are climbing into the air, higher and higher, with the trees kind of getting further and further away, and when that happens, obviously it looks like it's going slower, because it's further away, and so that should hopefully give the right kind of illusion. I mean, some of that we're gonna have to play around with, and we may discover we need different transition pieces maybe, or something. I don't know. We'll see what that actually ends up looking like. But it'll be interesting to mess around with that, and try and get that to look good. I really think that'll be sort of key to giving the game a unique look, as far as NES shoot 'em ups go. I mean, there are some really interesting shoot 'em ups that have pretty cool graphics, like Crisis Force. If you've never played that before, I think that was a Japan only release, but it's a really impressive shoot 'em up. Has some really nice graphics work. Charram could be used to give a sense of parallax. Yeah, I mean, we don't even need to use Charram necessarily. You could do that through bank switching if you... I think we looked at Metal Storm the other stream. I don't know how many streams ago that was, where it just had these sections in the Charram that were a bank where it was constantly rotating what was there, and then it gave the illusion that these were all of the whole Charram, that those were moving, and then it just used those in background areas to give the sense of parallax and depth, and it was really cool. At that game, they did some really nice artwork, and it's a really good game too. They're supposed to be re-releasing that one. I don't know when, but they're officially. I saw they're officially re-releasing that, complete in box and everything, which is pretty cool because that game is expensive. It's even gotten more expensive now than when I got it. I think when I got it, it was $80, and now it's. Last time I looked on price charting, it's somewhere around like 120 or 130, which is nuts. But I imagine that'll change when they re-release it. So as you change the scroll speed, the sprites for the lower layer would have to animate so that layer looks like it's still at that speed. Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of little changes we're going to have to make. We might have certain enemies that will, not be in the higher altitude portion, and we'll maybe want them to transition to be smaller. The other thing is we have that turret thing that shoots out the low altitude projectiles. Right now, they're not doing anything, but as it makes that arc, we'll want to animate the sprite so that it starts off small and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then once it's off screen, it'll transition to whatever ship thing it is that flies up the screen and actually attacks you. So a lot of work to be done there, but Jordan has some really good ideas and is pretty capable. So I'm sure it'll look really good as we sort through all these things. So anyway, getting back to this, we had made this change, and one of the things that we're not doing properly in the asset tool itself anymore is we are not exporting the draw code properly anymore, because we had switched over the draw entities code to split up the drawing of the projectiles and the objects in the game separately. So we should fix that. And then that, let's see. So one of the things we did was I added a byte here in the sprite object to identify it as a projectile or not a projectile, so that we knew how to divide up the drawing in the loop. Because that was one thing that I was not 100% clear on whether it would, there was no way to know, right, without specifying that. Now, right now, nothing is actually designated as a projectile because we just added that property into the reserved area. So what we should probably do, in here, they're in here. We should go through and modify these sprites. I don't really want to re-export them. I don't want to go through that trouble. I think I can probably just modify the code, the sprite file directly. We'll see. That may not be true. So let's see. So the reserved area, interesting. That has more in it than I expected. So we have, this is our file name embedded in it. And then we have our width as 2 bytes, our height is 2 bytes, the number of collision points, which is 1, has a character, the number of tiles, that is, let me go back for a second. So 8, number of tiles. Oh, sorry, number of bounding boxes. Oh, that's what it is. Number of collision points is 0. Number of tiles is, I'm sorry, this is what I get for trying to read the hex here. Okay, number of bounding boxes is 1. Number of collision points is 0. Number of tiles is 1. Is animated is 0. Frame width is 8. Frame height is 8. Projectile is 0. So we're going to change that to 1. So that is at position 269. So what we will do for all of these sprite files is, for the projectiles, we will at position 269 mark them as having 1 as the value there. Flyby, low altitude projectile. That is definitely a projectile. And okay, and that was it. Those were the ones. All right, so that's that. We've got our sprites modified so that they actually indicate that they are projectiles. So the reason that's the reason I put this reserve buffer in there is that we could, you know, kind of consume that byte by byte as we need to without hopefully having to re-export everything. That being said, we will have to, in our code that, you know, handles exporting the sprite, should name that more consistently. All right, so that's that code there. So is projectile, and let's just, well, you know what? We'll just steal this because it's basically the same thing. Is projectile, and then switch it over to the appropriate. Could probably write some code to handle this a little bit more elegantly instead of sort of brute forcing it, but I don't know. I don't know that it's worth doing right now. So let's see. So this is, we're loading the sprite metadata. So we got to also is projectile that's good. If you set a loop segment and an amount of loops, you shouldn't need a loop out segment, as it is just looping the name table that is loaded at the start of the loop. Do you count from when it appears at the top or the bottom? I haven't really thought about what the loop counter is iterating on yet. And then also, I would imagine that the way that it would work, we wouldn't have a loop out segment like you're suggesting. It would just be part of the map that you interstitch with it. Maybe you have a transition set of transition tiles that you put at the bottom in tiled. I don't know 100% yet. I haven't really. And you know, an interstitial sort of set of meta tiles would be good, but I don't know if we're going to have space for that, because that may be too much. I don't know. These are all things that as we play and test, we will see what looks better and what we can actually do. It's one of those things about building on an older system. You have ideas of what you'd like to be able to do, but ultimately you kind of are limited, obviously, on what's actually possible given the constraints of the system. So, all right, so it being a projectile is now being loaded from the metadata and stored. So let's, I guess we should add let's add something for that in the user interface when you open the sprite. Doesn't hurt to I assume the loop will be declared. I assume the loop will be declared in the JSON for the map, and I think you're updating the. So the JSON for the map doesn't understand the concept of the loop because the map is just the map. The JSON for the asset tool will kind of stitch all of that together. Alright, so that gives me that. And then if it's checked, we're just making sure that that is just to make sure that that all looks good. So all right. Oh, I never changed the position or the make it a little bit above. That's too much. Too much. Okay, so let's make it like 180, and then I guess this is already used. Let's make this 110. There we go. Just make the position here a little bit. Yeah, there we go. All right, so if it's a projectile, it's got the checkbox there checked. If it's not, let's see, player sprite should be unchecked. It's unchecked. Okay, cool. I've got a new player sprite I want to incorporate, not tonight, that Jordan made for Cerulean. It's the ship itself, which is really cool looking. It reminds me, I told him I would send him a picture of what it looks like on a CRT. I should probably do that at some point soon. All right, so let's take a look at this. So all right, so right now, what we need to do is we need to, it's essentially the same thing, but with, we're doing 2 loops through, one for projectiles, one for non-projectiles. That's really what it comes down to. So that's our loop here, right? We don't need the boilerplate rather, I should say, repeated there. We just need this code to be looped. All right, and then the scope will be slightly differently named. I assumed that the loop would be declared by in the JSON in the map, and I think you're up. Oh, that's the same comment as before. Okay, sorry, I just didn't want to miss anything. Okay, so so we just initialize that, and then wait, we don't have to do that. There, we do it here, and if entity loop else. So first time through, entity loop is going to be 0, which means it's going to come into this else statement, and we're going to sprintf s into entity list name. max file folder name, projectile, right? Projectiles, sure. And this will be objects, and then we'll put that into this, right? So we're saying entity, projectiles, drawing is the scope, like we have here, and then draw entities. We'll do a comparison of the output and see what that looks like. Draw entities, load entity type, blah. Now here is also alright, so what we're gonna I'm gonna change it a little bit because I want this to work for here and it's lowercase, which I don't care about that in the label. I just it needs to be consistent. So okay, so that loads it from now the either projectiles or entity list. That label is fine because it's in that scope. And now any place where we're doing entity plus, we need to fix the code to reference entity list name. So this, right? And where else? Where else? I guess I can do a search for that, right? Oh, there aren't too many places where we're doing that. Okay, cool. Good. So that changes that. And then at the end of the loop, jump, check, and sprite. Okay. And let's see what this looks like. So this is still doing that, I believe. Yep, jump, check, and sprite. Which goes, where are you? There, and it checks it, and then it increments entity counter, max entities, done sprite, jump, draw entities, and then done sprite. So the only other thing is we got to switch the order here. We want done sprite to be contained within the scope because it is self-contained. And then if we are on the first loop, we are going to have to output this. We're going to have to reload X with the 0. So let's see here. This is for the entity loop. So, all right. So if entity loop equals 0, reset X to go through loop again, right? So printf drawing load X 0, new line, and store X entity counter. And then the code here is all object stuff, so that would be all good there. And then I believe this is all the same here. Done sprite, yep. All right, so the only other thing we got to fix is in here. If it is a sprite, and then if entity loop equals 0, and current sprite dot is projectile. Oh, IntelliSense. Let's do it like this. If entity loop is not 0, which means that it is for objects, and it is a projectile, then we will continue. We're not going to work with that one because we're dealing with objects. Only draw projectiles if any loop is equal to 0. All right, so now in theory, should be able to do the export here, and okay. So let's take a look at what that actually exported here. So that's looking good so far. That's that's not okay. I assume that it's just let's see, load sprite if entity loop isn't 0 and current sprite is projectile, then it's going to continue. Why let's take a look at this, why this is doing what it's doing. So any loop is 0 and is projectile is 0. I guess I'm just not excuse me. I'm just not getting it off properly, I guess. Let's do this. Let's all right, that should do what I wanted it to do in the first place. So any loop is 0, current sprite is bullet, and it obviously is a projectile. Okay, so have that run, go to this. Let's re-export from here. I'm confused about why it's adding. Let's see. Oh, am I not? Am I checking too late in the? Oh, okay. That's Oh, I forgot that it did that. Okay. That was just silly. Okay, no problem. So I forgot that it does the comparisons first, and then it actually generates the drawing code, which obviously makes sense. But we didn't check in this location like we did with the other. Okay, so this is... It's kind of annoying because now we have to load the sprite twice, basically. Should probably fix that. And then, in the interest of keeping this quick, let's just keep it as is. Alright, so that's better. I got bullet, enemy bullet, low altitude projectile. It has the code for those. Check end sprite is done. We're done with the sprite. We end the scope. Load X, store X. That's good. Entity objects drawing. That's all the stuff that you'd expect. All the animation stuff. And then we're done sprite. Okay, so let's now the moment of truth. Let's compare this in KDiff. So alright, so the case is different. That's fine. I don't care about that. That might be a problem. The tile index is offset incorrectly. Huh. Interesting. We'll have to look at why that is. That's just spacing. And once again, the tile indices are wrong. And it's likely because we're just, because we're skipping things, it's not calculating the offsets properly. But I don't remember what math we're doing to make it skip, to generate the index values. So this will be one of those things where we need to take a quick look at that. The good news is the majority of the code is right, so that's cool. Let's take a look at that. The tile that it uses. Where is that code? Current tile plus Y tile offset plus X tile offset. And these are calculated by what? Okay, so basically we have to go through the math of the math of offsetting these things, but without actually rendering them. Because that's what's messing up the what we're doing here. So instead of just continuing, where's my code for that? instead of just continuing the loop and skipping, what we're going to do, we're going to set something that says if we're going to render the text or not. Again, not super efficient necessarily, but a good way to get things done quickly, and it's not like we're iterating over huge amounts of data where this is going to cause us to be obscenely slow, that we care about the performance. I care more about getting this done quickly than I care more about it being efficient at this point. So let's see what we need to do. Every time through here, we're going to say should render text true. This will turn off the text rendering, and that will also turn off the text rendering. This is okay as is. Really just will do this, right? Oh, should render text. That's kind of, let's make it more assertive. Should render text is sort of a lousy name. There are comments in the generated code for what's being set. You know, the position that it's being set at, and the and what it is that's actually being set. In this particular case, I'm not sure what comments would be useful here. So right now it's more so an issue of just the math to calculate the offsets of things being necessary, but not being necessary at the same time. This is kind of, again, a kind of dumb way to do this, but it will work, and it's not horrible because we know that the code in and of itself works. It's just, it's one of those things where we are, you know, instead of doing that here, let me back up for a second. I'm being a little bit too literal in what I'm attempting, for no good reason. This is fine here. This is good here, and then if render text, let's just let's bracket these off a little bit, because otherwise this is going to get out of hand. So if y is greater than 0 and render text, there's no calculation here, so we don't even have to enter that. If render text, we do need to increment current tile. That's going to be important. We're going to go through all this stuff and then say if render text to just not generate the code here. Same thing with this. We're going to say end render text because we want to just skip over that whole thing if we're not rendering text. If render text, we do want to add the 8 there. All of this is important. That's all important. That's all important. That jump doesn't need to be there if we're not rendering the text. This is actually dumb too, because we don't even need to loop since we're not doing anything useful here. If render text, again, this whole thing is actually not necessary if we're not rendering text. This is okay. Didn't generate that code. Didn't generate that code. That's good. I think that's better. Okay, so let's see if we got comparable values now. I think we did. Yep, that is... Oh, that's still wrong. Why? Oh. Right, because if that's interspersed, the tile index is going to be out of order. Come back to me here. So let's take a look here. We actually have to... we do have to reset the current tile, because even though we're not rendering the text for them, we are reprocessing all of the same ones, and that will actually make a difference. File reload. And that's why we were getting the discrepancy in the indexes. And now everything matches. Okay. So, in theory, I should be able to... I'm a little scared of what's going to happen here, but it should be okay. I mean, the diff didn't show anything, so if we replace this... So far, so good. All right, so that rendering code is now good, and it's automatically generated. That's exciting. That has excited me. Cool. So that's working. And like I said, the main reason for that being important is because we had, obviously changed all of this, but I didn't want to start messing with the export process on this until we had the full export part working properly again. So now that we're there, now we can start. Well, that's cool. So that means that this is actually now generating, it seems, everything that it's supposed to correctly, and we can start working out how this is all going to translate into the 6502. So because this is a live thing and I started a little late, I'm going to wrap up here for tonight. But I will, of course, continue maybe tomorrow a little bit, but definitely next week on Monday. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining the live stream, to those of you who did. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Clervis. I am on Nintendo Ages Zelius. As I mentioned, my email address is zelius@gmail.com. feel free to check out the itch page that I posted with the pre-order if you want to get access to the code. And I will give you access to the repo on GitHub. And I don't think I mentioned $15 US. Not looking for anything crazy. Just looking for basically the cost of the ROM plus a little extra for early access to the source code, which, as I mentioned, will eventually become completely available after the game releases and sometime thereafter. So yeah, so have a great night. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I will see you online. See you Monday. Have a good night.